Hi, my name is Samantha O'Leary. I'm the Head of Training at TA Education, and I'm joined by Professor Steve Molyneux. Would you like to introduce yourself, Steve?
Yeah, hi everyone, my name's Steve Molyneux. So I've been in the business now for nigh on 40 years. I'm Professor Emeritus in Advanced Learning Technologies, and so over those 40 years I've seen lots of challenges, lots of opportunities that have been grasped, and lots of opportunities that have probably been missed. So glad to be here today with you, Sam, and discussing the exciting things that could happen and need to happen in 2024 and beyond.
Absolutely. So as a former English teacher, I'm really passionate about how we can really provide teachers with sort of the professional development that's going to really help them to broaden their own digital skills, but also build the digital skills of students. What for you is the important thing about professional development for teachers?
I think the first thing to say is we've missed it. Yeah, I think we miss it in a lot of the opportunities. And the other thing we tend to do is we confuse digital skills with PD. So a lot of the PD that we do is really about providing teachers and pupils with those basic skills on how to use the IT. And by how to use the IT, I mean, how do I turn it on?
Yep.
How do I turn it off? How do I reboot it if something goes wrong? What do I do if something goes wrong? The bit that's missing is the follow-on from basic skills PD, which is more to do with competencies. So that's how do I take the basic skills that I have and move that forward so it has an impact on my work, whether that work is about learning outcomes for my students, changing the pedagogy of my classroom, looking at new pedagogic and didactic models, or if I'm a school administrator, how do I increase the productivity of my school? How do I get better value for money so that I can invest more in my staff?
I think you're absolutely right, Steve. I mean, I do a lot of training out with schools, teachers with school operations staff, and actually there's a real kind of sort of historic focus on the click here, press there. The functional use of technology, but without really the meaning behind it sometimes. And so particularly during COVID, actually, I think, sort of everybody had to go through a massive steep learning curve.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of schools had to really kind of bring on a learning of a whole new platform. Many schools were not kind of digitally enabled, and there was a sort of massive need to do that very, very quickly. And so there was a lot of training kind of delivered to support that. But I also think that often that was delivered by, say, maybe the IT staff. And so, IT staff don't necessarily understand the pedagogy sort of aspect of things. They don't understand kind of a teacher's kind of flow within a lesson. And so actually I think that gap that you're talking about is really, really important. And we're seeing that a lot now, sort of post-COVID, I think. So what do you think we should be doing to kind of address that?
So I think that the COVID brought on something that demonstrated what I've just said about the difference between skills and competencies. If we'd have got everything right and our teachers had the competencies to teach using the tech that we use to deliver remote or hybrid learning, and our students had the skills to learn, then we wouldn't have the problem that we have in education, where so many of our students worldwide lost elements of their education because, unfortunately, great teachers who are great at teaching in the classroom took the didactic models that they were using in the classroom, which may have been, a 30-minute lesson, a 40-minute lesson, and thought, we can deliver this in front of a screen. Now, you try and engage with students for 40 minutes in a classroom is bad enough. Doing it in front of a screen. Yeah. And of course, as we found out in many instances, the students themselves are very inventive and will find ways around things. I mean, there's the well-known case of the student that decided, well, actually, I can record a video of myself, play it back on my iPad or my tablet, whatever they were using. Put that in front of the camera with a couple of nods, and a couple of shakes of the head and a couple of, yes, I know what's going on. Put that in front of the camera and then went and played with their dog. Yeah. I mean, they're very astute at using the technology. So it's changing that. The one, like I said, this post-COVID was very much about changing the pedagogy, but it didn't happen. We went back into the classroom and taught how we taught for the past 10 years, 15 years, 20 years. And I think that's the problem with using EdTech in general. We've always been promised this transformation in education, whether it was just the computer, back in 1975 with Bill Gates saying, we're going to have a computer on every desk, right? Great. We now have a computer in every pocket, well, nearly every pocket, right? But we still don't make use of it effectively and efficiently to get those aims. You look at every other industry, you look at the way we've changed in terms of the way we shop, in terms of the way we interact with government, in terms of the way we interact with our bank. But in terms of the way we interact with education, nothing has really changed in terms of pedagogy and didactics, since the 1900s.
Even in terms of functional kind of operations, I'm often in schools and I, sort of delivering some perhaps foundational kind of level training. And I always ask the question, how do you communicate? Let's talk about communication for a minute. How do you communicate personally? And people talk about kind of all the different applications they might use to communicate. And we then go, right, okay, what about in school? How do you communicate in school? And they're still communicating in the same way, digitally, in the same way as they might have been doing 10, 15 years ago. And that actually kind of is very telling, because there's been a move and shift around education, I think. But within education itself, and this is obviously not every single school, there are many schools doing great things, and we definitely, recognise that. But I think there is that kind of culture shift that needs to happen that perhaps has been slower, in education than it has been outside of the world. And that's really actually difficult, because when we think about kind of our students, they've got to go out into to this wider world, and they need those skills and competencies to be able to actually, function.
Well, exactly. And I mean, if we look at the whole thing about BETT at the moment, almost everywhere we find is AI. Yeah. Now, AI could be seen as one of those solutions that's out there looking for various problems that it can solve. And the same is true within education. I think one of the problems that we face is like all the other technologies that we've had in the past. Many schools, many teachers have shifted to a multimodal model. Yep. So they may make use of more video. They may make use of having students, rather than create essays, they may create sort of presentations for the teacher to look at. But some schools will say, okay, you've done your presentation, now can you print it out, and give me the paper. And my concern with AI is that in education, we look to AI for automating a lot of those processes, which would be great because it would free up more teachers' time. Yeah, many would say, by freeing up time, that allows teachers to invest more time in their students. But as we all know, as educators, senior management are very good at filling gaps with other things that you can do if you have some freedom. And I think we need almost a revolution in education from a political level. We have to look at what education is there for. It's not just to teach subjects. And if we think of primary schools now, by the time they get into the workplace or move into higher education, life won't be the same as it was when we started just teaching English and history and music. I mean, they are key, but the way we teach those subjects, maybe we should be looking at more of an explorative approach. We need to move away from ed tech, i.e. the education and technology and the mergence of those, and become ped tech. So it's more about pedagogy and technology. People use terms like e-learning. We're into the fourth industrial age. Why do we need to use the E? It is just learning. And that's a massive change for teachers to go through in a culture where they may not feel comfortable, but don't want to show that they're uncomfortable, in the same way as, we still have millions of people out there. There's an underclass at the moment who don't know how to engage with the technology, and governments are forcing that technology on the individuals, and they cannot, they say, well, we'll provide access, which is key, by having access to a device and access to a communications channel. They put them in libraries. What do governments do? They start to close down the libraries. So we're building a digital underclass, which we also need to eradicate, which is why, the big push for one-to-one devices in schools so that they can start to use those from a society perspective and not just in the same ways we did with textbooks.
Absolutely. And I think, as somebody who's sort of spent a lot of time kind of working in mainly secondary education, I personally had very little kind of support around the use of technology in education. If I think back to my teacher training, I can remember doing a 2-hour session on how to manage a classroom that was a computer room, but that was all about behaviour management. It wasn't about using technology for any kind of pedagogic benefit at all. And I can remember saying about a year ago, standing up in front of a hall of 150 teachers, and I asked them to raise their hands if they'd had any kind of input around the pedagogic approach to embedding technology. So actually thinking about why are we using the technology, not just that we need to, but actually what impact is that going to have, what opportunities do we need to give to our students, how do we need to plan lessons differently, to actually make sure that, that idea of kind of taking a different approach, how do we make sure that the students get what they need, and that they are able to be creative and explore and be inquisitive, become independent, all of those things. 150 teachers in front of me, 2 put their hand up, and they were both ECTs, early career teachers, who sort of had in their university courses, they'd actually had some conversation, and that's the picture kind of very, very widely across the UK particularly, that we've asked teachers to embrace the use of technology in the classroom. And we might have shown them how to use, say Microsoft Teams, for instance, and be able to set up a digital classroom and start to use things like assignments. But it all still kind of feels like we're missing, actually where the power is in this. In the, sort of if you look at the ed tech models of, whether you're looking at the technology integration matrix, whether you're looking at TIM, whether you're looking at TPAC, whether you're looking at 21st century learning design, all of these things, at the heart of it, it's those digital life skills, those digital competencies that you're talking about, that actually are what we need to help our students with. But it's no wonder our teachers are really actually, in many cases, struggling, because you've got the teachers like me. I'm happy to put my hands up and say I'm a techie nerd. I love so I love tech.
But you're not a techie nerd. That's the problem. As you mentioned earlier, a lot of the training, a lot of the PD that we've had was being delivered either by, the teacher that's responsible for IT, who is, I won't use the term techie nerd, it might be about a little bit, but certainly more technical, right? And we'll use acronyms, and teachers are terrified to say, well, I don't even know what that means, or don't worry about it. So they really don't get it, which is why it is highly important that PD, as you found out in TA, that PD provided by educators that don't just understand the education system, but that have been there, that have suffered, the pains of being in the classroom where you've got a group of kids that really don't want to engage, right? And some teachers are brilliant, many teachers are brilliant at getting that engagement. And I think what happens is with the technology, we can use that technology not only to support those who are gifted and talented, but also those that are starting to disengage. They're used to using their tech, but the students use their tech very poorly. It's like teaching or reading on screen, completely different than reading on a page. All the research shows that it's more difficult to read and digest on a screen. And the smaller the screen, the worse it is. Not to do with the eyesight, but how they use it. If you watch today's students on their mobile phones, I do the same. It's not just our students. They skim read, right? They don't read and digest. And there were some of the PISA reports where they were particularly looking at assessment that said assessment done on paper sometimes gives better results, or most times gives better results than if it's done on screen. So we need to redesign, we need to find the problems with the tech and change the way we provide our students with the skills to make effective use. We put PD in schools for teachers on how to use technology to enhance teaching and learning. But the teachers aren't the learners. The students are the learners. But we assume, wrongly, that they all know how to use the technology effectively and efficiently, which they don't, and they never have for the past 20 years. We've learned absolutely nothing from the past, and that's where we desperately need to change. I'm working with companies like Lenovo, right, who are the tech masters, or one of the tech masters, educators working with industry. That's the key to get true digital transformation in education.
I agree. I think we aren't necessarily using kind of the tools that we have available to us even now. The things that are kind of present in our platforms and in our devices, sort of to the highest benefit. I also think that, you're right in what you say around kind of the students building those skills. I often get asked, you're doing training for us, can you do training for the students? And the answer is actually always yes.
Yes.
Sort of at the heart, I'm always still a teacher. And yes, we can actually kind of, sort of provide those learning experiences for students as well. But I think that's often part of the problem, in many ways, that actually we need to look at the whole, sort of environment of the school and actually think about what are the needs of the teachers, what are the needs of the students, and how do we meet those needs to help them then to develop kind of moving forward. And I think, sort of a big push for me recently, sort of, it's always been a push for me, but I've been kind of really, having really meaningful conversations with schools around, well, where do you go now? You might well have the functional use of a platform. You might well have the functional use of, a digital classroom. But are you actually using it appropriately? I've been presenting here at BETT over the last few days about, well, you might have one-to-one devices in your school, but are you actually really getting the most out of having that device? That device should be part of the pencil case. It should be an embedded part of what we do and how we work. But actually, the case is quite often that's superficial or sporadic. And that, I think, is something that, sort of really good professional development can actually address.
And I think that's where the problem is, because after professional development, because of constraints, many constraints that we have by that dreaded word government, whether it's school inspections like Ofsted, whether it's league tables, whether it's reports that you have to create, it's things like that that act as barriers, and we need to remove those barriers, and we need to bring in the third element. So we talk about technology, we talk about education, we talk about pedagogy, we talk about multimodal learning, where we're using video and audio, and we're using didactic models that are about creation of content, rather than just consumers of content. The missing interaction we have is with the neuroscientists. What we need to do is find out from the neuroscientists, how is it that humans interact with technology? I mean, there's a lot of work at the moment looking at engagement, for example, right? Kids love to have dopamine kicks. We all like a dopamine kick, right?
Yes.
Human beings like the easy way out. Anything that's hard, no, I don't want to do that. Which is why a lot of kids these days, they turn around and they turn off from education. The brilliant teachers know how to turn that on, whether they have technology or not. So I think we need to start looking at the research from the neuroscientists and say, how do we bring that together? How do we bring education, technology, and neuroscience to get the best for our learners as we move in to the fourth industrial age?
I couldn't agree with you more about that. I think, sort of the idea of, even if we take gamified learning and gamification of learning, actually that is really picking up on sort of why students will engage with, sort of say, resilience. Let's take that as an example. If you're playing a computer game, why would you play the same level kind of over and over again? But then when you are asked to be resilient in an education context, you give up at the first hurdle. You just go, I can't do that.
So tell me, Sam, where do we? I know we're wrapping up and we're running out of time, but so where do educators go to find out more about the things we're doing in terms of PD and with Lenovo and things like that?
So in terms of kind of TA education and the work that we're doing with Lenovo as well, as a digital transformation partner and as a training provider, we can support kind of schools, with looking at how they, sort of broaden the scope of PD for teachers. You can always find us at ta.education as our website. And we can easily, have conversations with you about how we can take those training needs further. And we can even do things like kind of run a digital skills review. There's something I'm presenting on a bit later on, is actually how do we work out where our staff are now? Because how do we work out where they need to get to if we don't know where they are now? So, there are lots of different things that are worth considering, and it's definitely, sort of something we can support with.